Somebody isn't happy. It's unfortunate. Well, so glad you guys are back with us in week 2 of our work series. And actually, I can't believe I forgot to mention this. We're doing 2 baptisms right after services today, so please stick around. And that's like super awesome and exciting. I've been getting harassed by my fellow pastors around town and other places because we've got a water trough for our baptism. It's super redneck, and there's no like two ways around it. But it's like I've been getting harassed. Like, dude, you're the outpost. It sort of fits, And I'm like, bro, we're not a Western outpost. This isn't like, it's not the idea here, And so it's like, I'm getting into like explaining our branding and stuff, and Anyways, none of that matters. And so we're baptizing 2 people today. That's what matters. And so please stick around after services, and we're going to do that. But I want to just kind of briefly recap where we were last week. Like I said, we started this series, The Theology of Work. We said, man, that on any given week, I talk to probably 50% of you, and at some point, work comes up. Work is a problem. Work is something to celebrate. We're biting fingernails over a job opportunity, or maybe, finding out if you're going to be furloughed or lose your job. It's just a constant cycle of things that have to do with our work. And so we ask the question of, like, does the gospel touch our work? And the answer is absolutely. And so we're looking at that. And last week we looked at these sort of 3 pillars, and I want to briefly talk about those because for some of you, your expedition group didn't start last week. It's going to start tonight, and this will be helpful because if nothing else, you'll get these things. And first of these 3 pillars, we said that God intended for us to be workers from the very beginning, right? It's like work isn't some like necessary evil that we just have to endure for like 30, 40 years just so we can get out and collect seashells our last, 20 years of existence here on earth. That isn't how God planned it. Like actually from the garden, we see that when everything was perfect and all as it should have been, like work was there and it was good. And then directly as we're leaving, God is kicking us out of the garden. The door hasn't even slammed shut yet. And God says, hey, continue working outside. Continue this act of cultivation, right? And we called this thing, anybody remember what that was called? We read it last week. This is like, do you remember? Dude, come on, make my day. What was it? Creation mandate? No? Okay. Creation mandate. Yep, that was it. Nice try, though, man. Hey, you might, dude, I'm going to, give you something just for, piping up in church, right? So we haven't figured out that you can talk in church yet, but you guys can totally talk in church. And so the creation mandate is what that was called. And so, man, this is our job, to rule and subdue the earth, to fill and multiply over, right? This is a job that we're given by our Creator, and we're made in His image. And this leads us to our second thing, right? That our work matters, has dignity and eternal value, right? No matter what you do, your work matters and it has value, not because of what you do, but because of who you work for, right? We said that this Creator God made us in His image to continue on the act of creation. And God's acts over creation were incredibly diverse and unique. I mean, we have chemistry and physics, and how does a bumblebee's wing work, and what's happening at the heart of a neutron star somewhere billions of light years away in our galaxy or something like that, right? Like God's work over creation was incredible, was unique, it was creative, it was multifaceted. And in this, we were created as His image bearers to continue to go outward and to take this good creation that He is jam-packed full of potential and take it somewhere, right? This is. And so we connect to our purpose and to our greatest function in work, not because of what we do, right? There isn't some hierarchy of work, like there's some jobs that are more important than other jobs. No. All jobs have dignity and value as they point back to the Creator in whose image we were created. So that was pillar number 2. And then finally, we looked at work as this sort of theater of redemption. I told you guys, you're supposed to be something. Anybody remember what I was supposed to be? It was totally weird, and it got some weird laughs. Anybody remember what I said you were supposed to be last week? Oh, pink spoons. You kept your notes, didn't you, Luke? No, that's good, man. Yeah, pink spoons. Yeah, and I told you guys, you ever been to Baskin Robbins, right? And what do they give you? They give you a little pink spoon, they dip it in, and what does that pink spoon do? Well, it gives you a foretaste of what comes after that pink, right? The hope is that you really like what that pink spoon is there, giving you a foretaste of, and that you actually go for the whole cup after that, right? And this is our job. This is who we're supposed to be, is these agents of redemption in the world, and our work is meant to display the beauty, the goodness, the rest, the vitality of God's kingdom We're meant to be pink spoons through our work. And there's 1,000 different ways that we can do that, right? Every single one of your jobs, I told you that there's going to be 1,000,000 different applications over the course of the series because guess what? We all do different things. And there are different ways that you can display your pink spoonness in your job, right? Like I read you an example of a woman who really sparked the aging in place movement, right? Things that even as early as 20 years ago, some of the things available to people with disabilities and stuff like that, it wasn't there. And she was a Christian woman who saw that her faith and work were deeply interconnected. And actually, she gave us this quote that said, the longer I'm alive, the more I realize that the more these two streams interact and touch one another, the more fully alive I actually am. This is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus through my job. And she's an architect, a designer, an engineer. She's bringing out the goodness of God's creation. She said, you're only disabled in your home if you can't do what you want to do, right? And so she really sparked the beginning of the aging in place movement that is man, it's found its way into homes and businesses and hotels and stuff like that all over the world now, right? And so there are 1,000,000 different ways that you can be pink spoons in your job. And so those were the 3 pillars that we talked about last week. This week, we're going to talk about one thing, and we're going to keep it really pretty simple. And that's the fact that work is sometimes bad. Anybody? Show of hands. Is work sometimes bad? Okay. A few of you guys love your job, and a few others just don't like to talk in church. That's all right. So I'm going to tell you a story, like I always start every week, and it was about my job in the military. For those of you who don't know, I did 10 years in the Air Force, and I think in another lifetime, I may have been an architect or engineer, designer. I think I could have done. I don't have any skills in those sort of things, right? But I enjoy doing it. I like at the end of the day having a product that I can put my hands on. Something anybody else resonate. Yes, I want to be able to put my hands on a thing that I've created, that I've fixed, that I've made, or whatever the case is, right? And so I think maybe I could have done that or something like that. But I don't know. I don't have any skills in it right now. So just hopes and dreams, I guess. But because that's the way I'm wired, my job in the military was sometimes incredibly unsatisfying. So my job, I was a nerd. I wore a lab coat and sat behind a microscope most days, right? So I wasn't kicking down doors or anything. I know. My job was to find cracks on aircrafts. That may not sound like too big of a deal, right? And we're talking cracks that are microscopic, that you can't even see with the naked eye. If you can see the crack, you actually don't need me. They need me for times where they can't even see the crack. So it's I'm finding some invisible thing that may or may not even exist on this plane. And my job, and the name of my job was non-destructive inspection. So if I've done my job right, then you don't even know I've been there actually at the end of the day. And so can anybody see how that would be rather unsatisfying if you're the type of guy who likes to build something or whatever, right? And so probably one of the most demoralizing, most demotivating stories of my entire career is I was down in Florida, and we had these little secret squirrel spy plane things, and they look like civilian aircraft or whatever. And we had this colonel that was getting recertified. And if you know what a colonel is, a higher ranking person in the military, right? He was getting recertified or however that works, staying proficient on his hours or whatever. And he takes this plane up, and he both over-G's it and he hard lands it. And so for any of my maintainers in the room, you're oh, yikes, right? The dude drove it like it was a Corvette or something, and it was like a Ford Ranger, right? And so he rides her wild and then puts her down hard. And so when that happens, it drives all of these inspections, namely this one that's underneath the wing of the aircraft, right? Because what happens if something in the armpit of the aircraft it fails? Well, they just sort of fold up, and that's the end of the story for anybody on board, right? So finding cracks in that situation is really, really important, right? And so nobody on base, though, was qualified to do the job except for me. There was a civilian company that worked on these aircraft, so military didn't even touch them typically. And so they did the quick tabulations and found out that it was going to cost them about $60,000 to bring in an outside contractor to do what I was actually qualified to do. And so quick math said, you're doing that. And so they slotted me over there, and for 2 months, dude, I'm sitting underneath, I'm checking inside rivet holes for cracks, right? So if that sounds tedious, It is. And so you're inside there, and you got to find where it's at inside the bolt hole, how deep it is, and dude, it's insane. And so then they'll fix it, and we got to come back, and we got to look for the cracks again. If it sounds monotonous, that's the point I'm trying to get across, right? So we finish up, 500 bolt holes done. And I'll tell you, the thing that got me through was knowing that aircraft would one day again fly in the sky, right? So a week after I finished my inspections, they got it all buttoned back up and ready to go, safe for flight. The same colonel, Colin's going to laugh at this, same colonel comes out and he hard lands it again. So the Air Force was like, it ain't even worth it. It's not, this thing's already passed its life cycle. You know what they did? It tore its wings off, they shoved it in the back of a C-17, they flew it to the boneyard, y'all. I'm not even kidding. I cannot explain to you the heartache and the pain that I experienced after 2 months of pouring myself into this aircraft just to go watch. Every time I drive past it, it's oh, they took another wing off. And it's it's going, oh, they're putting it in the back of the C-17. They're going to just scrap it for parts. Yep. And so, man, anybody been there? Anybody been there before in your job? No, I mean, maybe not the exact place, right? But have you ever been to that place in your job? And yes, if you've worked more than a day, you've been there in that moment. And work, dude, it's bad sometimes, right? And I don't know if bad is a best word. Bad can mean it's evil or something, right? I don't mean that when I say bad. Maybe there's a different way to talk about it. We'll talk about that in just a second, though. But maybe some of you guys, it's you've poured your heart and soul into the military. Maybe you've been over to Afghanistan, right? Well, how are you feeling right now, right? You've been there. This is your moment, right? If you've been in there and you've invested and you've seen things change, maybe a little over time, and then all of a sudden now, everything that you've worked for the last 20 years, if you've been in the military, just evaporates overnight. You may have been there. You know anybody that's struggling through and dealing. Maybe people that have actually lost some things in the middle of that, just to watch it all come crumbling down. Maybe it's some project that you've invested your time and energy into. Maybe it's for months that you've been working on this thing, and then it's all completely undone and it just evaporates because of a decision of somebody over you, right? Maybe the dude just doesn't like you, or he just can't see the brilliance of what you're doing. And with one decision, everything you've done. Anybody seen anything like that ever happen? You've been there, yeah. Maybe you're in the people business. Is that ever rough? Yeah, man. You mentor, you invest into. Sometimes you want more for people than they actually want for themselves. And then what happens? They just walk away. And so what do you do in that moment? But be heartbroken and just destroyed over that. Or maybe it's this. Maybe it's just the on and on and on of the mundane, right? The ticking of the clock, day in, day out, week in and week out. And you realize, and you look up from your desk one day and you realize that droning sound is just this career taking you one click closer to death every day. Anybody just ever get lost in the existential stuff? Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you. So I've been there, right? And you're watching it and you just realize that hey, I'm 5 seconds closer to dying than I was when I clocked into this place, right? And it's just dude, it can get dark, so don't stay there very long. But that's a thing. Or how about this? Anybody have the person at their job that when they're gone, things just happen? Anybody? Dude, work goes good, and then that person's gone for a day, and productivity shoots through the roof, right? Either because they're not there stirring up office drama, or whatever the case is. It's just dude, but you know that this person is riding the gravy train on biscuit wheels, and they're never going to give this job up, right? That's because that's how those type of people work, and so they're never going to leave. They're going to outlive everyone at that job, and you're always going to contend with that person. And they only take vacation twice a year, right? And so it's just kind of seems like that's how it works with those people. And so you're left with the saying, it's just dude, I know that we're not at all reaching our potential. And so yes, can work be bad? Yeah, absolutely. Work can be incredibly, incredibly frustrating, right? And so again, but by bad, I don't mean evil. So I want to kind of maybe define this well, and then we'll move into it, right? Here's what I mean. That even though we can pour all of our heart and strength into work, it is still riddled with failures, frustrations, and even unmet potential. And when the Bible talks about work being bad, it uses agrarian terms or farming terminology, right? And so the idea is this, that you can cultivate the ground, you can till the ground, you can plant the seed, you can water it right, and like you can do everything right? And yet, because of things like, beyond your control, things like drought or pests or weeds or blights or diseases, our garden can still be fruitless despite our best efforts, right? Anybody kind of get this concept? And so, I think actually fruitless is maybe a better term to describe what I mean by the nature, like the broken nature of our work, right? Let me read you a quote by Tim Keller about this. This kind of tells you why we're going where we're headed today. Here's what he says. He says, work exists now in a world sustained by God but disordered by sin. Only if we have some understanding of how sin distorts work can we hope to counteract its effects and salvage some of the satisfaction God planned for our work. And that's why we're headed where we're headed today. Because work's broken. We've proved that, right? Without a shadow of a doubt. Work is broken. Work is messed up. And if we're going to counteract and we're going to move beyond what this can lead to, because the reality is that fruitless work leads us into one of two really nasty places. And we're going to kind of look at those because if you've been around long enough, you've had a tendency to fall towards one of these two sort of bad places, right? We're going to Genesis chapter 3. If you have your Bible, you can turn there. And as we're going there, remember last week I said that we were created in the image of our Creator God, right? Given this creation mandate to work the ground, to produce bread, to bring out the fruit of potential that God has placed in creation, really ultimately at the end of the day to extend human flourishing. And the purpose for that is that human flourishing would lead back to the worship of our Creator God, right? So this is kind of where we're headed. And by page 3 of the Bible, so those pages 1 and 2 that I just described there, by page 3, we broke it, right? Things are not going super great. And so we're going to pick up where God comes back to sort of like, hey, you broke it, and here's what that looks like, right? Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 through 19. We're going to read that. The Lord God said to the serpent, this is the one who sort of tempted Adam and Eve to take the fruit and all that good stuff, right? Because you have done this, cursed are you more than all cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you will go, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Then to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it, cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread, till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So here's the deal. This passage is commonly referred to as the curse, right? And we need to kind of zoom out and take about a 30,000-foot view of this if we're going to understand this in work terminology today, right? Because here's the deal. Curse is a little bit of a misnomer. God didn't like put the curse as some sort of evil on the world, right? The curse isn't so much an evil that was put on creation by God as it is God defining the results of sin entering into the world, right? No, here, you've made this decision, now here's what it's going to look like, right? God isn't like, boom, lightning bolt, right? You did wrong, and so, pow, this is what it's going to look like. No. Like this is what you've unboxed, this is what you've let out of the cage, and here's what it's going to mean for you for the rest of your days, right? And so he begins with the serpent. He says, look, from now on, because you have listened to the voice of the snake, because you have done this, like, there's going to be this open hostility, this, like, spiritual thing that is lurking like a snake in the weeds, ready to kill, steal, and destroy. And you're going to have to contend with this for the rest of your life, right? Like, it's there, and it's going to be the thing that brings you down one of these days. And then he turns from the serpent, and he talks to the woman. Here's the deal. If you see God's words to the woman as only applying to her or all women, right? Then you've misunderstood what God is doing here, right? This is actually intended for all mankind, right? Because not only will we contend with spiritual evil in the world, but our relationships with one another will be broken as well. We begin operating off of a new ethic, a might makes right? The biggest stick makes the rules. And power imbalances create little conflicts and big conflicts all the time. And this is what God is what we're doomed to now, because we've let it out of the box, right? He also speaks a word about the broken nature of our bodies because of sin, right? We were once enjoyed a pain-free existence. That's not the case anymore. The thing that God did effortlessly and with a word, which was to bring about new life, He did it with a word. It was beautiful, and He invites us in to continue this job, and it was supposed to be a beautiful, and now all of a sudden this thing that was supposed to be a beautiful existence is now incredibly painful. And He's speaking a word about, this isn't about women and childbirth, this is everything. It touches everything. Our bodies break down, they die, they experience pain, right? But then finally, God turns to Adam, and this is where I want us to really focus this morning. He turns to Adam to define how our relationship with the rest of creation is now broken because of sin. Now, God's words to Adam were quite literal because he was a farmer, right? And so let's just talk about it from farming perspective really quick, right? For any of you who grew up on a farm, what makes farming hard or fruitless? Anybody got anything? I got a story. I was probably 13, and my grandpa, he had a big farm. We go out and work on it. And he told me one day, he was like, hey, I need you to bring a buddy out, and I got a job for you guys, and I'll pay you good. I'll pay you really well. And I'm like, dude, heck yeah, man. And so I talked my buddy Craig into coming out, and we got out there, and my grandpa, he hands us 2 big giant burlap sacks, and he says, see that field there? And it's like, yeah. He's like, see all them little purple things out there? It's thistles is what it was, and it was a hay field. And so if you know, you can't mow down hay and put it in hay, because cows won't eat it, and it'll make them sick if they do, actually. And so what's the only way to get rid of thistles? Well, you gotta pull them out. And so my grandpa was like, you guys get all them thistles pulled out. He said, I'll pay you good. And, oh man, I should have specified, because we worked, it was basically slave labor, y'all. We worked all day in the hot sun. There was bugs, and it was terrible. And we walked through this field and ripped out the thistles all day long. And at the end of the day, my grandpa, he'd carry out around this big wad of cash. Anybody else's grandpa carry around a big wad of cash, man? He whooped out this big wad of cash, and we're like, oh yes. And so he's like filtering through there, and he pulls out 2 crisp $20 bills and hands them to us. And I thought my buddy Craig was going to kill me after that, man. He was not down for any more adventures out of it. True story. I promise you, I'm not embellishing that in any way, right? $20 for what? It should have been a several $100 job to pick thistles, right? And here's the deal. This is it, right? This is how farming works. He had neglected his field, and what just naturally happens? What grows up with thistles? And what happens is you try to contend with the thorns and the thistles, right? Is it good? Is it good work? No. It's hard. It's broken, brutalized work, man. It's not what we were supposed to contend with. If you're a farmer, you know that the tilling and the raking and the watering, all that stuff, the harvesting, that's really a small part of what it means to be a farmer. 90% of your job, 90% of your effort goes to keeping diseases and pests at bay, keeping the thorns and the thistles and the weeds out of your field and out of your garden, right? Making sure that it doesn't get consumed by drought or blight or something like that. 90% of our effort goes to combating the thorns and thistles of our work. And let's blow out beyond the agrarian terms. And does that describe any of your jobs? Yeah, absolutely. Right? Maybe we experience seasons of good, right? But it's broken bosses, it's messed up coworkers, it's processes and machinery, equipment, things that just break down and tear up over time. And it's just dude, it comes about in 1,000 different ways, right? Did you know that this year alone, the United States will spend nearly $11 billion on what they call IAP, which is, let me look at it, intelligent automation processes. That is the GDP of multiple third world countries combined together just for us to take the human element out of things. And why is that? Because like the robots at Amazon don't call in sick, right? They're gonna take your batteries and move them into the shipping department every single time without fail. And if they wreck into another robot taking somebody else's batteries to somewhere else, then guess what? They're not going to get a workman's comp thing in the mail, are they? They're just like, oh, we'll fix it. Right? And it doesn't matter. Like if you stand there and yell and cuss at that self-checkout machine until you're blue in the face, guess what? It's just going to keep on boop, boop, boop. It's going to do its thing, man. Or it's not if you stop, right? And it doesn't need a lunch break, and it doesn't take holidays off, and it doesn't even need to be paid, right? Why is this, man? Because, like, dude, anything that we put our hand to, just like it unravels at the seams. So we find ourselves locked in this seemingly like 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of dance in our job, right? Like for as long as things may go well, it may go not well for just as long, if not longer. You may experience job satisfaction and like productivity, and then, dude, seasons of not the case, right? And when work is fruitless, when that's what we experience, we're prone to one of 2 things. And the first one is this. When work is fruitless, we're prone to hopelessness. Here's the deal. Hopelessness manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. Anybody ever been in seasons like this? Like you just pull up to your job and you just see that person's car in the parking lot and you're just like, oh. And you just have to like gather yourself before you're like, okay, I can do this. You like pep yourself up and like, we can do this one more day. Friday's 2 days from now. You know, it's like, and it's like, or you've seen them. Everybody's been to the DMV before, so you've seen those folks, right? And they just like sit there. It's like, dude, what? That's where like the end of hopelessness. Does anybody work at the DMV? I'm really sorry. I'm not slamming you, I promise. But anyways, that's like that just seems like the place that collects like the hopeless people of, you know, it's like, dude, I have no hope left in my job, whatever the case is, right? And what do, man? It's like, well, maybe we can go somewhere else, but if you've been around long enough, then guess what? That place is broken too, isn't it? They got workplace drama, they got messed up stuff, they got whatever the case is, and it doesn't mean that we relegate ourselves to like toxic workplaces. That's not the case at all. But like it's just a realization that any place that we find ourselves in, there's going to be thorns and thistles. And what happens if you pull the thorns and thistles out? What happens if you're actually successful and you fix things and things are going really good? What happens? Okay, so they come back tomorrow or next week or 6 months from now or a year from now. And it's like, dude, you get to start the process all over again. That's one of the hard things about deployments, man, in the military. Is like, for you guys who've been some, it's like you go and you got things going good at home, and then you get back and it's like everything you fixed before you left is just broken all over again, man. It's just like, dude, for that reason, dude, deployments and TDYs can be really demotivating. It's like, man, I just like everything I've worked for, it all just fell apart while I was gone, right? So we're prone to this like sort of hopelessness, and it leads to all sorts of things. It's anger, it's resentment. Dude, it leads us to make toxic workplace choices and create further toxic environments. It just like we lose sight of like what's important and why we do what we do, and all of a sudden now it just compounds, right? When there's one thorn, one thistle, it's bad, but they multiply exponentially as things get worse. Anybody ever experienced that, right? So that's one thing. And the second thing that I think that we're led to do sometimes is if we don't fall towards the side of like hopelessness or despair or anger, right? Then I think on the other side of that spectrum is that when work is fruitless, we are prone to create idols of our work, right? Here's what I mean. Go back to Genesis chapter 3. Let's look at verse 19 again. We do some, we read this verse and then we do some simple math, and I'll help you work that out. Here's what it says. By the sweat of your face, you will eat bread, right, till you return to the ground. And then we don't have to read the rest of it, right? So here's what happens. We set up this really simple equation. It's called a conditional algorithm, also known as an if-then algorithm, right? And it goes something like this. You're going to help me solve this, right? If sweat equals bread, then what? More sweat equals more bread, right? Anybody do that equation at work before, or know anybody that has worked that equation out? Yeah, absolutely, man. And when we apply this equation to real life, if we're not incredibly careful, our work can become an idol for us. That's why we've worked this out. That like, man, I can push back against the curse. I can push back against the thorns and thistles. I can just white knuckle it. I can rip out the thorns and thistles, and like, we're going to make this thing work, dadgummit, right? And we're just like, and you show up every day, you put in the hours, you sacrifice. But what happens is we begin to pour more sweat and more sweat. Is actually before long, we start sacrificing a few things on the altar of career, don't we? This is like one of the first stories in the Bible. Genesis chapter 11 is a story about this thing, right? Like don't miss this, the beauty of the story of the Tower of Babel, right? Because mankind, by the sweat of his brow, right, we master this new technology. We are carrying out our creation mandate to go and to subdue the earth, to bring out its potential that will bring forth the greatest amount of human flourishing. And in their technology they made was the brick, right? Has that done anything good for society? Yeah, absolutely, right? Man, we build homes and hospitals and roads and all sorts of things, right? But the problem is that instead of allowing this new technology that they had developed by the sweat of their brow to create human flourishing that pointed our eyes back to God and the beauty of our Creator, you know what they did with it? I promise you I'm not being crude. They built a giant middle finger in the middle of the desert back to God. They did. And they worshiped their own, intellect, their own accomplishment, basically shoving it in the face of God, saying, God, we didn't need you to do this or to accomplish. They even say it, man, we will make a name for ourselves as we build this tower that reaches to the heavens, right? Can you hear it inherent in their voices, right? Here's the deal, man. We do the same exact thing today. We work by the sweat of our face to make bread, and then we sacrifice on the altar of career as we do that. We sacrifice our most precious resource, the thing that we get no more of, and that's time. We sacrifice our creativity. We'll sacrifice our kids on that altar. We'll sacrifice our marriage on that altar. We will sacrifice our moral standing on that altar. Y'all, you know what I'm talking about, man. You know what it takes? You know what it takes to get ahead? You know what it takes to beat the curse, to move past thorns and thistles and not experience? What does it take? It takes imbalancing relationships. That's Eve, right? It takes a might makes right mentality. And if we're going to win this, or we're going to, then I've got to I'm plowing through, right? And we'll leave a trail of bodies behind us. When we sacrifice on the altar of career, looking for our work to fulfill us in ways that only God is meant to, our work has effectively become an idol. Don't miss that. So, those are the two ends of the spectrum, right? Work is fruitless sometimes. Work is bad sometimes. And it just is, right? It just is. But it leads us to one of two places, and those are the two ends of the spectrum. Hopelessness, or it leads us to create idols out of our work. Everybody tracking with that? Everybody good? We good? Okay, because we're about to dive into some deep waters, and that is the book of Ecclesiastes. Actually, one of my top 3 favorite books of the entire Bible. Anybody read through the book of Ecclesiastes? Real show of hands on this. Anybody read through the book of Ecclesiastes? Okay, so if you've done that, then you know that may be disturbing, that's like one of my top 3 favorite books of the Bible, right? For real, because it gets dark, and I don't mean like a little dark. It gets really dark at times, right? And he says all sorts of things that are like. But anyways, okay, so here's if you're like the type of person that has, existential fear and angst, maybe it's not the book for you, right? If the droning, slow march of time that is dragging us all to our deaths isn't something that you like, then maybe stay out of Ecclesiastes, right? Actually, probably one of the better books for you if that's you, because I think it helps us think about it in some really good and some right ways. But you have to have a few keys in your hand if you're going to read Ecclesiastes right? And so here it is. This is a little tool for your tool bag. If you go and you read Ecclesiastes, there are 3 keys that you have to keep in hand. And luckily for us, they're actually found in the first 3 verses of the book, right? So here's the first 3 verses, and then we'll talk about the keys. You guys listen really, really carefully, all right? Ecclesiastes 1 through 3. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanities. That's verse 2. Verse 3 is, what advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? So what I didn't tell you is the book of Ecclesiastes, it really helps us navigate these two places that we're prone to sort of move towards through our work, right? Hopelessness, or we're just working for the weekend, or we just lost all hope through our work, or we've turned work into an idol, and we think we can derive satisfaction and whatever through our work, right? So it actually helps us thread this needle of faithfulness, but you have to have these three keys. So we just read the 3 verses. Here's the 3 keys. In verse 1, there's a key. How many contributors are there to this work? Do the math. Put verse 1 back up there. Oop, 2 slides back. Yep. There. One more. Yep. There we go. How many contributors are there to this? There's 2, right? There's a narrator who in verse 1 is introducing you to a teacher. Preacher, is what he says. Preacher, teacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. And then what does verse 2 sort of kick off with? Verse 2 kicks off with a set of quotation marks, right? Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, right? And it's just, so you have a narrator, and you have this teacher. And this is really incredibly important because you're going to see this narrator, the very first verse, and then things are going to get really dark because the teacher goes to some really dark places. And then he comes in at the end, this narrator does, and he sort of makes it all mesh together, makes it all work together really well, right? And then, and so that's key number 1. Key number 2 is that word vanity. Anybody else have a different word in your Bible? May I have a different word there? Maybe meaningless or futility or something like that. You know what the Hebrew word is there is hevel. And this is amazing, because it actually doesn't mean vanity or meaningless or any of those words. It actually literally means smoke, or mist, or vapor. And the idea is this. It's a word picture. It's that smoke, cloud, vapor, whatever, it looks to have substance. It has form, right? You can see it, and it looks to have substance. But what happens if you reach for it and you try to grab it, right? It actually has no substance at the end of the day, right? And so it's vanity. It's meaningless to try to grab this thing, because as hard as you try, you can't actually grab any of it in your hands because it's smoke. It's hevel, right? So that's key number 2. Key number 3 is those words, life under the sun. So you're going to see those 2 things, life under the sun and hevel, all throughout the book. Life under the sun just means this: anything done this side of the new creation. Any work we do, anything that's done apart from God. Sometimes it means things that are done against God's law, but really at the end of the day, it means anything this side of the new creation that we put our hand to and that we work on, right? So those are the 3 keys, and we're going to read a passage really quick, and we're going to close things out. Because I think, helps us see this dynamic, the tension of work that is broken or messed up or fruitless. And then the narrator comes in at the end, and he really helps us tie it all together. Here's what he says, the teacher. He says, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate the forest of growing trees. This dude is actually he is, as far as work and cultivation is going, he's rocking it, right? I I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Don't miss this. Thus I considered all the activities which my hands had done and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was hevel. All of that I had done was vanity, right? Striving after the wind, there was no profit under the sun. And a little further down in that same chapter, right, here's how he concludes his thoughts. This is 18 through 23. He says, Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. For I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. See what I mean? It kind of gets like really dark all of a sudden. And he tells us some things about our work. Like, and here's sort of the idea. Let's take our keys and let's apply it to this what he said here. The book of Ecclesiastes is meant to be seen in direct contrast to the book of Proverbs. Read Proverbs, you got the little calendar on your desk or whatever, really encouraging saying every day. And the basic mentality is this, that if you live with wisdom and if you live rightly, then things are going to typically work out well for you, right? That's sort of how, and if you don't, and if you do evil and you don't act with wisdom, then things are not going to work out for you very well. But then the book of Ecclesiastes comes in, which we are pretty sure was written by the same guy. And this sort of cynic, nihilistic dude is like, well, actually, not always. Because actually, I've met a lot of really evil, greedy people that have flourished and prospered at the end of the day. And I've met some really great people who work with integrity and wisdom, who love their neighbor and love their children and their wives and serve their families and serve their community. And things actually don't work out well for them at all. And so here's what he says. And he just reads us this about work, right? Like you can put your hand to it all day long. You can work as hard as you want or don't. And like go have fun and live for the weekend. But here's the deal. If you look for hopelessness, like the fun and just like the distractions away from work, he actually says this at one point, just like eat, drink, and be merry, right? Like, because at the end of the day, if you're looking for either of these things, work or the absence of it, to give form and substance, beauty to your life, then it's hevel. Right? It's all striving. It's striving under the sun for something that actually at the end of the day, it doesn't amount to anything. And then our first key, the fact that there's a narrator, he comes in at the very end of the entire book in like one little half chapter at the end of the book, and he wraps it all together and he says, actually, yes, listen to this guy. He's right. He's seen some things. He's been around a little bit. He knows what he's talking about. He's actually right? Because if we live under the sun as though this is all there is to life, then yes, work as hard as you want, or eat, drink, and be merry, because they both have the same value at the end of the day. All right? Because what's going to happen, if this is what gives your life form, substance, if this is what gives your life value and worth, then at the end of the day, you're going to open up your hands and you're going to realize that there was actually nothing there all along. And here's how he says that. This is how he concludes the entire book. This is the narrator. This is not the teacher. Here's what he says. He says, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is this: fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. And why? Because God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Don't miss this, man. God's judgment is our ultimate reality and will expose the substance or lack thereof in our life. Like we said last week, man, work that is done in service to God, that has eternal value, right? Man, here's the deal. We can't rid the world of thorns and thistles. So that seemingly like gives us one of two options, right? Well, why even try? Hopelessness. Or no, forget that. We are going to try. We can rid the world of thorns and thistles, right? And so we try for that as well. That seems to be like our two options that we go for. And yet, like the gospel gives us a third reality that extends beyond life under the sun. That actually both of those things, both of those approaches to life in work are hevel at the end of the day. They're form without substance. That we can't actually rid the world of thorns and thistles, but there is someone who can. Revelation chapter 22, 1 through 5. This is the end of the story. Listen to how the story ends. It says, then he showed me a river of water of life. This is the new creation. This is life in God's kingdom, right? And it's clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the middle of its street, On either side of the river was the tree of life. And what was this tree doing? We were having to like scratch and seek to like make it bring forth. No. It was just freely bearing its fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were what? They were thorns and thistles. They were for the healing of the nations. Don't miss this. There will no longer be any curse. And the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. They will work there. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And there will no longer be any night, and no longer have need of the light or of the lamp, nor the light of the sun. Why is that, man? Because this is life beyond the sun. This is not life under the sun, right? This is a new kingdom reality that we are all headed for. And here's the deal. This isn't like, I don't want you to be mistaken. This isn't some like how-to guide for how to rid your work or how to like not get stuck by the thorns and thistles of work, because there's no way to do that. It just is. This work is broken, and it just is right now. Here's the good news, though, man. That there is someone who can remove the thorns and the thistles. And he's coming in again to remove the curse. And this is good news that should fill us with that should keep us from hopelessness, and should help us as we look forward to the hope that is in Jesus and his coming kingdom. This good news also keeps us from falling into the idolatry of work, man. And there's no amount of success, recognition, money, or job satisfaction that can do for us what Jesus has already done and promised. No amount of sacrifice or sweat on the altar of work can give you what Jesus has already given through the drops of blood that he sweat as he was preparing to sacrifice his own body on the altar of God in the shape of a cross. Here's the deal. Like, we're going to look at a new vision. Like, how do we see work, right? I mean, this isn't how do we fix work or anything like that. It just is. Work is broken, and it's messed up, and it's fruitless, despite our best efforts, man. So this isn't about how we fix that or something. We're going to look at a new vision for how we should see and approach our work next week. But before we did, man, we had to look at the thing that gets us stuck sometimes. Man, you know that feeling like where you work for the weekend, right? Like even some of the worst. It's like, man, we were going camping Friday night, and I was like looking forward to it. And the problem is that when you do that, time just like fast forwards, right? And I had a lot of stuff I needed to get done this week, and so it's like I'm really looking forward to it. But it's really helpful when work is bad, right? And like things are going bad, and so we kind of look forward to the weekend. It's like, dude, this is it. This is the ultimate rest, and we're going to talk about that ultimate rest here in 2 weeks, right? But this is the idea. There's coming a day when the thorns and the thistles, all that stuff is gone. Like we don't contend with that anymore. And this is supposed to provide us with both like hope and an anchor to keep our hearts away from the idolatry. And so I don't know where you're at this morning. I don't know where you walked in here at. Maybe this is like news to you. Maybe this is the first time you've heard this message. And so maybe you need to follow after Jesus for the very first time. Man, I encourage you to do that as we're about to start singing here in a second. Or maybe for you, work has become an idol, right? And just if we were just to stop and objectively look at the things that you're willing to sacrifice on the altar of work, it would be really evident that it was an idol. Now, how are we looking for things in our work that only Jesus can ultimately provide at the end of the day? How do we need to go back to the gospel and bask in those truths again and allow it to fill us with hope? I don't know. But I would ask you this. I'll be at the back and would love to have that conversation with you no matter where you're at. We're going to have a song here in just a second, kind of different for us. And we have 2 people in the back that are getting ready to get baptized. And so our worship team is going to come up on stage now. And man, this is a big deal for us. We have 2 people that have made that decision to follow after Jesus. I mean, I want us to celebrate like our team just won the Super Bowl, right? You guys good with that? We cool with that? Like, I want that to be like just that's how we do things here at the Outpost, because this is a huge, monumental deal. And so I don't know where you're at or what you need to deal with, but work is broken and it's messed up. We need hope for that, man. And as in all things, I wish I could be more creative than this, but I'm also glad I don't have to be. And man, as our eyes are moved back to the gospel, it provides us with a hope and the anchor that keeps us away from hopelessness and the idolatry of work, man. So I encourage you to deal with that. Like, go back and prayer over that as we stand up. So you guys stand with me. Let me pray, and we're going to go through a song, and then we'll do our baptisms. And by the way, our kids are going to be coming in, too, because we wanted them to be a part of this. And so just know there may be some moving and shaking. We won't sit down, or actually, yeah, we'll sit down again. But they'll be coming in as we're singing here in just a second. And so just kind of make room for them. So, Father God, we love you, and we praise you. We thank you. Thank you for work that we get to put our hands to. Just thank you for the heads up, God, that work is broken and messed up. And thank you for the hope of Jesus that lets us know that it won't always be that way. Father, I just pray that we would cling to that hope and where it leads our hearts now. Father, I pray that we would look for the satisfaction, the recognition, the fulfillment, the needs met that ultimately at the end of the day only you can provide. Pray that we would realign our vision for work. Work wouldn't be an idol for us. We wouldn't sacrifice and worship at the altar of work, God, but we realize that it is